primary and secondary data, since datasets are not disaggregated at local jurisdictions from small townships to small towns and municipalities. Luckily, my research obtained critical inputs from mayors, practitioners, and professionals of local governments and jurisdictions. Though urban data is challenging to collect, I argue that every research project matters, as the results could fill the missing urban data needed for framing strategies for building a sustainable urban economy to achieve the SDGs. Small town Canada constitutes a major part of Canada's economic and resource geography. Key concerns have been raised about the future of small towns and cities in terms of their economic viability and sustainability. In the 1980s, a diversified economic base, knowledge-based industries, high technology and productivity, flexible labor market, and new labor market practices formed the basis of a new labor economy and market economy. In the 21st century and beyond, the questions in achieving the sustainable development goals are relevant to forming a sustainable urban economy. At this point, let me have a quick review of the policy experience for local development in small towns and cities in Canada. Majority of local authorities have adopted an economic development strategy, if not a sustainability plan, at the heart of their local development policy to address economic issues for communities committed to sustain their local economy. Local governments, politicians, planners, economic developers, builders, business, and civic bodies engage in an approach called development from within, as the sum of indigenous efforts for planning, development, and management of the local economies. Local economic development, or LED, is widely known as bottom-up approach to complement the top-down regional approach to Canada's community development. Strategic planning in local economies is critical, as it is a process with a purpose in influencing the patterns of growth and meeting the community's needs. In the 1990s, there was a shifting trend in policy orientation from managerialism to entrepreneurialism in cities and communities. The managerialist trend focused on service provision and tax reduction, while the entrepreneurialist orientation actively promoted local economic development. Cities and municipalities have also taken the development approach to diversify their economies and the structural view of LED to enhance their sectoral, regional, national, and also international linkages. Much of the work within local jurisdiction include recruitment of new industries, promotion and retention small and medium-sized business, and investments in infrastructure projects. For future policy consideration, small towns and cities could reverse their state of economic development if they take a proactive and strategic approach to LED. Some small towns and cities beset with stabilizing their local economies have embarked in ingenious efforts to create jobs, broaden the tax base to promote growth, and sustain the community's quality of life and vitality. Most local communities have tried to look for development anchors, from universities to creative industries, knowledge-based industries, commerce, and retail, since towns and cities are potential spaces for growth and innovation. Following this review, let me raise key points for panel consideration. More than half of the world's population live in towns and cities. Placemaking at the local level can be an approach and process for building sustainable communities. In this context, placemaking can be a process of planning, designing, managing, and programming spaces to create patterns of activities to achieve a better quality of life, a prosperous economy, and healthy environment. As a collective undertaking through bottom-up approach, the process of placemaking may include housing development within the local economic development strategy or sustainability plan, the provision of housing and daily acts of maintaining, renovating, and building places can promote well-being in communities. In one study of LED strategies, housing development had 84% of the respondents that supported it. Placemaking can be a strategy for community sustainability that may complement the process of building a sustainable urban economy. Second is for localities to adopt economic security as a goal for sustainable community development. The need to adopt economic security and community sustainability initiatives is compelling. These normative terms are synonymous with securing people's well-being. And as articulated by the United Nations, economic security is a human right. If we want to build a world that views economic security as a cornerstone of well-being, we need to put housing and or habitat in towns as a basic need and key human right. Shelter is a critical necessity for human health and human life. Overall, there is so much to be done in the housing front to address the shelter needs of local communities and enhance the well-being of marginalized families and individuals, as well as indigenous peoples. To transform towns and cities with rich and vibrant community life, the shelter policy must be intertwined with a goal for economic security. That is, it's premised on inclusivity and equity considerations in our quest for a sustainable world right here at home in our planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosario. It was pretty insightful and more clear in terms of the actionables that could emerge in terms of the LED that could be a policy that has been implemented, looking at the placemaking at a local level with a bottom-up approach, and the economic security focused on shelter, housing, people well-being as some of the key initiatives. Thank you for the insight information.
Thank you.
Next we have Jeffrey Fletcher, Manager of Sustainability and Solid Waste in the town of the Blue Mountain, Ontario, Canada. Jeffrey has been involved in municipal waste management and sustainability planning for over 20 years. He's a member of ICLEI Canada Board and a graduate of Nipissing University, Environmental Geography, and Sir Sanford Fleming College Ecosystem Studies. Jeffrey Fletcher, I would request you to keep it within 7 minutes. The floor is yours, Fletcher. Most welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, it was fun to see all the Jeffreys. Jeff's here on the, but unlike all of you, I'm Jeffrey Fletcher from Town of the Blue Mountains, and I'm the manager of sustainability and solid waste for the town. And I suppose I'm the voice of an environmental practitioner. And in this panel discussion today, I want to talk about how the town is using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in sustainability planning and explore where the SDGs might be taking us. The Blue Mountains, to give you a bit of context, is beside Collingwood, and it's a collection of small towns and hamlets situated on southern Georgian Bay. It's in the lands of Treaty 18 of 1818. And our municipality is also crossed by the rocky green spine of the Niagara Escarpment, which is a UNESCO recognized World Biosphere. We have top tourism draws to the rural and natural features and recreation. All the local ski hills are in the Blue Mountains, which is also complemented by hiking, biking, freshwater surfing, gourmet eating, and much more. I will advance the slide. That'd be great. Thank you. Our municipality decided to update the 2010 Community Sustainability Plan. The new plan is being positioned as a foundational plan, as represented in this graph, for all other directional plans and operations in the town. The structure of the sustainability plan was developed with assistance from a committee of council and public representatives that determined that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals should be considered and referenced throughout the development of the local plans, goals, and objectives. Go to the next slide. We called our planning process the Blue Mountains Future Story. It is currently underway, and we have conducted several points of engagement with the community, including assistance from local artists and at the Future Story cafes. These were a blend of workshopping the community's goals, hearing from artists, and layering in inspirational music between group sessions. Go to the next slide. And just click again. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were used in the engagement process as discussion points in workshops, but also to assist in focusing report structure into logical and recognized goals. The plan also used 3 systems, which the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were captured in. These systems and the goals acted as validation to the local issues being expressed by the community and assisted in organizing areas of deeper dives. Go to the next. And one more. Yeah, so under each theme, we use local, national, and global data to dive deep and inspire discussion and give context to local perceptions. Our consultant called these sessions data walks. Go to the next. From the data walks conducted, we framed the insights gathered into a system that highlighted the relevant SDGs as a best practice. Go to the next. The systems or sustainable pillars were the typical 3, and within each of the themes captured local issues, and the themes tagged in a single or multiple SDGs. Go to the next. In a sustainability plan, the environment system tends to be the most topical and passionate point of discussion. We took a deep dive into the watershed health and used a local example of qualitative indicator system. Go to the next. So this is an example of that system, that qualitative system. We use the watershed health report card that uses several data sources to develop a qualitative view of aspects of local watersheds. I'd just like to emphasize the importance of this type of indicator or measurement. Under the economic system, we are so familiar with managing a number and pushing growth at very little consideration for anything else. We can't adopt this mindset in the environmental system. One might conclude if you can't measure it, it's not there. But if we focus only on quantitative measurements, we'll develop a cultural blind spot to the intrinsic value of people and their relationships with the living world. So we need to release ourselves from the dominance and manipulation of nature to one of an appropriate participation in the living system in which we have agency. We go to the next. So use this as an example. We can get biased towards the thing we are measuring, that we are able to measure, and that is intrinsically amendable to measurement. And in this case, it kind of looks like the machine is the better option. Go to the next slide. But, what if the forest had sacredness? We have been ignoring the importance of complex biodiverse systems at great expense. We go to the next. These SDGs are a set of universal goals for sustainability and a platform for discussion of the issues. But where is this platform leading to? It is, or maybe has been, a very common debate about what sustainability is, perhaps an enigma for some, and for others, debates over maybe you already are sustainable. And hey, depending on your definition, you might be sustainable. Look at the next slide. I prefer to position sustainability as a goal, but not as the end goal. It is a bridge we need to cross to develop restorative and regenerative cultures. This is the path for creating conditions conducive to life and all of our intentions, design, and activities. Go to the next. So just to sum up and leave a final thought, I feel that we need to revolutionize to fit our human cultures into the life-sustaining ecosystem functions of the places and the regions we inhabit. So thank you everyone for hearing my presentation.
Thank you, Jeffrey Fletcher. It was a very insightful one. Some of the key things that you mentioned include, the watershed health card is something that attracted the more quantification of data and assessment based on which the system works. And the myopic measurement, the complex biodiverse systems, and design regenerative cultures development. These are some of the key points what you have highlighted, which is very important and critical for us to take forward. Thank you, Jeffrey, for those insightful points. Next, we have Professor Juan Carlos Munoz, professor at Pontificia Universidad Católica at Chile, Santiago, Chile. Juan Carlos Munoz got his PhD in civil engineering from UC Berkeley in 2002. He's a professor in transport engineering at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, where he is the director of the Center of Sustainable Urban Development and the Institute for Sustainable Development. He also founded and led the Bus Rapid Transit Center of Excellence for 8 years. 3 spin-off companies have started out of his research: Shift Transit and E-Trans. Juan Carlos Munoz, it's your platform to take it forward. Yeah. 5 to 7 minutes, Juan Carlos, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ramaswamy. I'm very glad to be invited here. As you mentioned, I lead this Center for Sustainable Urban Development in Santiago, which focus mostly in the large urban problems. So for me, addressing and preparing this talk was quite a challenge to bring the thoughts we have into small towns and rural areas. The center I lead is quite large and addresses urban sustainability from many different angles: watersheds, energy, accessibility, streets, and territories. And of course, we have this SDGs as a very important framework to refer to. And of course, Sustainable Development Goal 11 is particularly relevant. Now, this is a very top-down approach in which sometimes we think that not always match very well the challenges that small towns and local areas face. In our center, we have developed what we call the Observatory of Sustainability Indicators, and we have developed 29 indicators in 5 different categories: environment, health, accessibility, equity, and governance. And we applied it to different territories. It's already in like 30 cities in the whole country, from the very large Santiago to very small ones. And it's interesting because it allows you to compare how different cities are performing in each of these categories. If you are curious, there's the website of the indicators and the methodologies we follow. And this is the kind of. Excuse me?
People can go on mute. Yeah, thanks.
So this is thank you very much. And so this is the kind of results we obtain, where for each of the indicators you can follow how these territories, how these cities are performing. I'm sure you've seen this kind of work very often. Now, one thing that is very rarely addressed is a comprehensive indicator. That is something similar to what is the Human Development Index, in which you can categorize how a certain population is doing in a synthetic way. And this is something we would like to do, to provide a synthetic indicator in which we could, at least for each of these categories, indicate how well are we doing in these different territories, and at the same time to characterize the inequality that is so common in South American countries as mine. Another thing that we're working on, and this is something that was done by the government, is to develop some indicators where you can also learn how rural areas are doing. where you have very little towns. And when you look at international references or national reference, in the case of Chile, very rarely rural areas are addressed by these sustainability indicators. There's very little information. And of course, when you start digging, you realize that those territories sometimes are performing quite poorly in terms of equity with other territories. So we observed a very significant imbalance of indicators for the urban and the rural context. And so the government decided to develop this platform to create and display indicators at the local level, including the rural municipalities. And there were indicators of social welfare, economic opportunities, environmental sustainability, and also culture and identity, which is very relevant in these areas. And this is the kind of indicators we had. We can see that there's a very strong imbalance happening here, not only in terms of information and data, but also of infrastructure, equity, access to public services. So the SDGs are addressed or lived in a very different way in rural areas or small towns than in large cities. And within large cities, of course, we have a lot of inequity too. The system was able to develop some indicators for mixed areas and rural areas, and we can see that very often mixed areas where there is some little towns, they perform better than rural areas in most indicators, which again, it presents the kind of challenge that we in my country at least have of bringing development and opportunities to people living in rural areas. So this is my last slide. We observe a very significant imbalance of indicators for the urban and rural context. We have developed this platform to create and display indicators at local level, including rural municipalities. And we're currently developing a distributed municipal platform to better adapt these indicators to municipality needs and obtain them at a more disaggregated level. So the idea here is to involve the community to participate on how what kind of indicators that they need to complement the more top-down approach coming from the SDGs, and at the same time guarantee that the indicators that you will develop are the ones that the municipalities need and are the ones that they will keep on working on and maintaining in terms of data. So thank you very much, and I would be happy to talk about other topics after each of the talks. Thank you.
Oh, so I was on, yeah. Thank you, Juan Carlos. It was very insightful of what the work that you have been doing. The CDS Observatory, consisting of the social equity, accessibility and mobility, health and governance. And I very much liked the spider diagram of the indicators, what you have put on the presentation, with around 875 indicators, and then about the telecommunication part of it, what you have indicated in your presentation. It was very insightful. At this point of time, thank you very much, Juan Carlos. I would request the participants, if you have any questions, you can start typing it on the chat or making notes, so that when we have the Q&A, the panelists will be much prepared to respond on those points as well. So start noting down your points so that the panelists are prepared to answer on your points. We will have enough time to address on that. Thank you, Juan. Okay, so with that, we move on to the next speaker, Ian Gilzion, Chief Architect of Planning and Architecture Division, the Scottish Government, Scotland. Ian graduated in architecture from Edinburgh University in 1982. He worked in architectural practice for a number of public sector organizations as well as in private practice in London, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. He also worked in community design units in Wester Hailes, Edinburgh, and Drumchapel, Glasgow. Ian joined the Scottish Executive in 1999 and became Chief Architect in 2006. He has responsibility for the development and implementation of Creating Places, the Scottish Government's policy on architecture and place. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and many thanks for the invitation to speak today at the World Summit. I'm delighted to join you here from Edinburgh in Scotland. So my talk is going to focus on the way data and placemaking have been drawn together in recent years in Scotland to provide better insights and approaches to place, and how that's impacting on developments at a strategic and local level. So my first slides will show 3 examples of new ways of using data and mapping, and the next section will show the impact on place, and these factors are interlinked. So the first slide shows an example of how we've been gathering data on Scotland's places, and how we're getting better insights from that. So in 2015, Understanding Scotland's Places was launched, and provides online, accessible and consistent data on the characteristics of all Scotland's places over 1,000 population. So that allows the DNA of a place to be analysed and used to inform investment and place-based priorities to be developed. So you can see we have stats on employment, education, commuter flows and so on. So the specific example I've given here is the coastal town of Eyemouth, which is a population of 3,500. And what you can do is look at the similarities to places such as Annan, Campbelltown and Invergordon, who are all coastal communities with economies in transition, but all linked to marine activity. Next slide. And what the USP data can be used as a starting point for a more detailed town audit, with finer grain benchmarking assessments covering 7 themes and 50 KPIs. Another resource launched in 2015 is the Place Standard tool, which enables communities, local authorities and other partners to carry out structured conversations and assessments of a place around 14 themes. And that allows you to identify assets and challenges to be addressed. And that's evidenced again on a summary spider web diagram. I think the important thing here is that spider web comes from those discussions. It's from people that live in the community's own assessment of where they live and where the strengths and weaknesses are. So in Eyemouth, you can see again the example. There's a strong sense of pride and connection with the place, but challenges around transport and connectivity and the transitioning economy. It has quirky attractions, such as the ability to feed seals that live in the harbour. One of the seals is blind from a fish cabin. And with that in mind, what I should say is also that assessment and the KPIs identified, for example, there's a shortage of space for small businesses and entrepreneurial activity. So with that in mind, the Harbour Trust is going in site next week with a new development to activate the harbour front, provide new small workspace units for micro businesses, and trying to encourage that entrepreneurial activity with its coastal location. That was a design competition won by Galmstruck Architects. Next slide. That's going backwards. Thank you. So at national level, Scotland's launched a digital planning strategy, backed with £35 million of investment over 5 years, and that's got a transforming place at the heart of its overall vision. And one of the key initial projects that I'm working with my colleagues in digital planning on is the PlaceTech Lab, which is going to bring together digital resources such as 3D VR rooms, digital printers, data labs as an accessible resource for the public and private sector. So that's aimed at encouraging a new approach to sustainable placemaking. And we're looking into developing a mobile version to serve remote communities in Scotland. And the missions you can see of the strategy there, the ways of working, people, innovation are the things that I'm closely involved in. Next slide. And this is just an example of how the digital planning tool that we're developing sort of operates. So this is a screenshot of analysis of vacant and derelict land adjacent to the River Clyde in Glasgow. And we can add other layers of data, zooming in and out from site scale to a regional picture, more or less instantly, depending on the data sets that we add in. And that should inform placemaking processes such as the Clyde mission work, which is all about regeneration of the Clyde Valley as that work develops. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on how that's all impacting on sort of place and linking back to the SDGs. So turning our attention to place-specific challenges, a programme for government last year shows a very clear shift in focus towards the local, and it's a key policy mechanism linked to this is support for 20-minute neighbourhoods. And that's been driven by a response to COVID and recovery, but also to tackle the challenge of climate change and creating resilient low-carbon neighbourhoods. Next slide. So what we've got is place now becoming a focus for a range of agendas. We have the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is all about living well locally and a just transition to a low-carbon economy. The place principle, which is all about aligning investment from various stakeholders and tackling challenges collaboratively with communities, and community wealth building, about deriving local benefits from the local communities, so places like Eyemouth can develop strong and inclusive local economy. Next slide. And this is all being reflected in at national level in our new national planning framework, which will be coming to Parliament in the next few weeks, which supports compact growth, reuse of existing assets, and expansion of blue and green infrastructure, and a support for town centre living. And I think town centres will have a new and important role in being the hubs of 20-minute neighbourhoods for many communities. And I think this is one of our clear ways of linking to the delivery of the SDGs. Next slide, and this is my last slide. So another important report for us linked to the future for Scotland's towns was recommendations from a report published in February 2021, and that builds on our town centre first approach, provides a refreshed vision for our towns and how to achieve that. And just to emphasise again, we're not starting from scratch. Places like Paisley are investing in town centres with ambitious and exciting projects, such as the Learning and Cultural Hub and the Secret Collection, with both repurpose vacant stores to provide new cultural infrastructure in the town centre. The Secret Collection houses all of Paisley's museum and galleries archive, and makes that accessible to the public using the big floor plate of a former department store. So there's clear recommendations in the town centre report on how we can use data and digital to support the way we approach town centre working. But that's where I will stop and hand back to Venkat. Thank you.
Mr. Venkat, I think you're mute, or?
Yeah, I got back. There was some disturbance at this end. I'm back. I think I missed the last part of from Ian Gilzion. Anyway, thank you, Ian Gilzion. Let me summarize some of the points what I heard from Ian Gilzion. Thank you for your nice presentation, and I really made note of the USP audit with 50 KPIs, and I did make note of the natural space, which is one of the key KPIs, and the 5 key missions of data, digital technology, way of working, and people innovation are some of the key things, what I made note of. I would take some help from Sonia when I, whatever I missed on it. Thanks, Ian Gilzion. Next speaker is Roslyn Morrison, Chair of the Board of Directors, Institute of Southern Georgian Bay, Ontario, Canada. Roslyn Morrison is passionate about the power of community and the region of Southern Georgian Bay. She currently serves as Chair of the Board of Directors, Institute of Southern Georgian Bay, a board member of the Blue Mountain Village Foundation, and a member of the Collingwood Sustainable Development Goals SDG Town Task Force. Over to you, Roslyn Morrison.
Good morning, and thank you to the summit organizers for the invitation to speak today. It's been an extraordinary experience so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. In my view, these summits are providing hope and inspiration and a growing knowledge network for collectively building back better through these extremely challenging times. I'm grateful that Collingwood has committed to becoming a model community for SDG 11, sustainable communities and cities, with the aspiration to collaborate with neighboring municipalities. The intent of the goal, to develop safer, more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable communities, aligns with the work of our fledgling organization, the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. So many people this morning and yesterday have spoken about the power of place. Elder Duke Redbird in his video address this morning, and many of the speakers that we've heard so far. The place principle, the expectations of collaboration, and measuring outcome to need are things that we've been thinking about. But in these times of massive change and transition, how do we help to encourage the mindset of sustainable economies and resources to achieve the SDGs? The Institute's vision, which you saw fly by, is very aspirational, as many of ours are. We've got 6 municipalities from a geographic scope that we've been working with, but that geographic scope is expanding. People from Owen Sound to the northwest of us, and people in Midland and Penetang and Victoria Harbour to the east of us are gathering together because we know we can't figure this out ourselves, and we need to collectively work to understand how we navigate the future most effectively. Next slide, please. The power of place informs a lot of our discussions, and I think that we can understand from the previous speakers' presentations how we can lasso this inspirational idea of the power of place, certainly here in Southern Georgian Bay. Next slide, please. So what we've been trying to figure out is, what is our role as a volunteer-driven organization to help? And so our founding objective was to promote sustainable economic, social, and environmental future. And so how do we collectively do that? How do we break down some of the silos that are happening here? How do we connect people and share the knowledge that is here, right here in Southern Georgian Bay, and certainly start to connect with larger forums like this? Next slide, please. So we've decided that our real purpose here is to connect people, to share that knowledge, and to foster collaborative action. Next slide. So we did that through COVID, and we pivoted like everyone else, and we began to have our online discussions collectively. And in fact, COVID helped us bring the region together. We are across a fairly large geographic footprint with 6 municipalities and growing. So how do we bring people together in a safe and intimate space to start talking about really important things? So the topics we covered, you can see on your screen, but the outcomes of our 2020 discussions about how do we map our road to recovery and what are the economic recovery plans currently thinking about. The discussions really focused on a few major things. Our artists, who we've all been leaning on through COVID, really need to have an ecosystem where their voices are heard. In sustainability around the world, artists are playing a very significant role in helping to carry on that conversation. So people wanted to develop a regional arts and culture strategy, and we just released that last month. Explore a social investment strategy. What does that even mean? And so we've unpacked that with a group across the region. We've got a social finance learning group looking at new tools, new social finance tools that people here have perhaps not heard before, like community bonds or land trusts, or many of the things that are being discussed during the summit. People said this regional discussion platform is extremely important to keep us connected. And so we embarked on our Sustainable Future series, in fact, inspired by last year's inaugural summit. And the last point that everybody's talking about is, how do we identify the key data points that are important to our community members? And I'm sure we'll be speaking more about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, who came to Collingwood, and she encouraged all of us to think about how our area could become a model community for SDG Goal 11. Next slide. And the stark reality is that there are a lot of people here and across our country who don't know about the Sustainable Development Goals, who don't know about Canada's commitment to them in 2015. So as we're trying to figure out the Institute's role in all of this, it's really how do we build those conditions where we're sharing the knowledge collectively, and then we're also creating the solutions. Next slide. So we started talking about how do we do new things? How do we operate differently? How do we start inserting new knowledge so that the sustainable future we're looking for in terms of aligning the economy, environmental and social issues together could happen here. So we looked at last year's resolution. There are 38 items in that resolution. It's large. So how do we start connecting those? And our design team focused on 3. 18, 19, and 20, about environmental challenges, about the issue of housing, and about how do we start inserting more innovation to what we're doing here? How can we create that multiplier effect by connecting these and adding more value to accelerate progress? Next slide. So we have developed a collaborative 7-part online discussion series. We have 5 municipalities that are coming along on the journey. We have 3 businesses who are supporting the program, and we've had hundreds of people attend these sessions. So the Honorable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, our Lieutenant Governor, kicked us off. Why build the case for a sustainable future? And how do we begin socialize some of these ideas? We brought the chief administration officers from across the region together for the very first time. We brought the mayors together for the first time in public to talk about pressing issues and the changing role of municipalities. It's no longer viable to say we can't afford things or it's not our responsibility. We all have to be thinking about how do we collectively operate differently. We ended before the summer with envisioning a low carbon future, and the exciting events coming up in November and December are around connecting innovative towns and innovation districts. And let's talk about sustainable, attainable, and affordable housing. So I'm very grateful that we've got so much input from this summit that we can insert into those discussions. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing? Social capital is being developed. A lot of people have spoken about building those relationships and that trust. We've got the major sectors coming together for the first time for these very interesting discussions. New knowledge is being widely shared. We're building alignment on these pressing issues. And most importantly, we're developing a willingness and a culture for learning together. And what's that doing for the community? Well, in large part, I think people are saying it's helping us be more optimistic. There is definitely a realization that now's the time to do things differently. Next slide. So what do we still need in our region? And I hope this part starts to inform the actions for our resolution, because I know that it is a world resolution and it needs to we need to figure out how do we bring it down to the local levels. So what do we still need here? Capacity for more data collection, a framework for achieving the SDGs, and Sonia has put a great question into the chat. We need to figure out how do we build communities of innovation here, and how do we enable, create an enabling environment for the development of a sustainable economy? These are very new ideas here, and so we need to be working together on this. We need to be chatting about new procurement practices. We need to ensure that we've got multi-level government support for projects addressing the SDGs, and figuring out how businesses, nonprofits, philanthropy, and government can start working together. Next slide. So what's next? I look forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Hello, Mr. Venkat. You can go ahead, please. Thank you.
I'm not sure, we might have lost him. Just.
Hello, I think we may have lost him, yes. I would like to introduce the next speaker. If you can just, I'm sorry, I just came into the room. If you can, who's the last speaker, please?
The next speaker would be Ms. Olga Workinova. I hope I said that correctly, and I don't have your bio right in front of me, unless Ilda, you may have that right in front of you.
She's the professor at Moscow State University, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today, Olga.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I'm very glad. I'm very grateful to be here at the second Collingwood World Summit, Habitat in Towns. And I would like also to share with you this ideas, this problem of partnership, solidarity, and urban governance. In fact, I'm affiliated to two different institutions as Moscow State Linguistic University and Primakov Institute for World Economy and International Relations, Russian Academy of Sciences. So thank you very much. Again, urban partnership for sustainability and peace includes not only the nation states as stakeholders, but also the governments and self-organizing networks, which is very important, and NGOs at the local level. And the importance of local governance in an increasingly urbanized world dictated a broad partnership and solidarity approach in favor of meeting the challenges. What are the challenges? So first, this is transitions. These post-COVID structural transitions, shocks to the finance, trade, and security regimes. And also, new areas of high sustained growth, stagnating regions or leapfroggers or shifts in trade patterns and regime. Then, of course, demographic problems, that is population growth, dependency ratios, inequality. And again, these waves of conflict zones. So continuing interactions between network members are caused by the need to exchange resources and negotiate shared purposes. Different and even contradictory demands for economic growth, ecological sustainability, and social justice demonstrate the necessity for creative dialogues. Common standards of measurement, universal criteria, or identical symbols are essential for sustainable development in an era of globalization. Just as the grid system of streets helped local development, so too does standardization facilitate the rationalization of the operation of urban economies and greater productivity. And this includes supposedly technical means, that is physical intervention through sectorial projects, and subsequently institutional reform and the promotion of public participation. And we have in Russia central-local relationship, and today it reached a stage where the essential need is to establish a competitive advantage and to offer goods and services more cheaply, and sometimes to establish supply lines for poor and weak inhabitants. And this also includes established digital procedure for registering and enforcing inhabitants or patients of compatible mechanical or electronic equipment. So in fact, digitalism, it's in the new post-capitalism economic system. And this is fourth industrial revolution and post-capitalism. And this is emergence of new political ideology, it's crisis of liberalism and new theories of social ordering and social contract. Licenses and professional certifications have also become standardized in order to allow human resource to flow across city space. And cross-national integration is vital to central-local relationship. High growth regions create an increased demand for inexpensive household labor, customized services, and hard-to-find goods. And some of these demands has been transformed into an informal economy, heavily staffed by migrants. Sustainable development also have a socio-cultural component, and this involves diffusion of a more open, multipolar and multicultural society in which migration is a major byproduct. Cheap, efficient technology compresses space and time, enabling groups to retain homeland ties and preserve indigenous culture among the migrants. And ethnic cultures are now said to thrive in transnational space in which language, habit, and tradition continue regardless of geography. However, a mutual vulnerability between native citizens and migrants contribute to mistrust, the spread of violence, or even terrorism. Responsibility for human rights, distribution of pandemic, and extension of organized crime and are issues becoming more complex as a result of growing multiculturalism and ethnic mobility. And there is a risk of producing institutions that are technically efficient, but incapable of expressing real social choices. So we have this project which dealing with a central local tension. We try to set up conflict observation system for small cities and small communities. And these include monitoring, building new infrastructure, training peace mediators and peace workers, and relaxing or abolishing tensions between the habitants. So this is, thank you very much. This is, I think, the main idea behind of my short presentation, that we need these observation, conflict observation system for small cities and small communities. And for a period, it was supported also by UNESCO program as well. Thank you very much for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. I'm back. Sorry, I couldn't give your introduction. Thank you, Sonia, for pitching in. It was interesting to listen about the digital registration and the economic system. And very specifically, I was impressed with your points around the migration, the ethnic culture, and the technology part of it that is getting played, and the conflict that arises between the native and the migrants, and the focus on the human rights, and the focus of the human and training the peace workers are some of the key points what you mentioned about. Thank you, Olga. Participants, we are just into the Q&A session, but I have to invite David T. Downey into the last presentation of this, which is also a very, very important point to discuss before we get into the Q&A. I would—
Hello, Venkat. I do
Yeah.
apologize for interrupting. Unfortunately, our next speaker, David Downey, is having internet difficulties, so he will not be present. So we can move forward into the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Hilda, for that. I don't know whether it is common. I also had internet disruption here, which is very uncommon. I am right now in Dubai, and I'm speaking from Dubai, which is bound to be technology savvy and fast. Somehow it got disrupted, the most unusual things to happen. So I think we can get into the Q&A session. We have around 15 minutes to the Q&A. There were a few questions which were come in. So we can start with Juan Carlos because he has a immediate next appointment for him. So Juan Carlos, there is one question. There was a collaboration with UN Habitat and Urban Observatory with EC-LAC in working with other LAC countries. Can you please elaborate further on that, Juan Carlos?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Well, we, as a center, we were invited to participate in UN Habitat #3, which was in Quito like 5 or 6 years ago. And right there, we were able to gather many researchers working on sustainable urban development and develop a new organization which is called Redeus LAC, and I will put the website in the chat in a minute. It's an organization where we try to gather institutions that are working on sustainable urban development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have been working on opportunities for interaction. There's a Center for Sustainable Development Goals in Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, in Bogotá, Colombia. And it's a center which tries to be a point of focus for all academic work in the region. And they have some research grants oriented to specific research teams working on topics like we at Universidad Católica, we have won some of these and allow us to develop some work not only from the Chilean perspective, but also from a more regional perspective, which I think it makes our research more general and more interesting when you can compare different territories. So this is the kind of work we have been doing in terms of collaboration within Habitat 3.
Okay, thanks, Juan Carlos. So there is one more question, which is on your point about involving community in developing indicators. This is something interesting. How did you embark on that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
You made a point about involving community in developing indicators.
Yes.
How did you embark on that?
Oh, yeah. I think this is a huge challenge because we're used to indicators that are very top-down, and the SDGs are definitely top-down indicators that not always suit different territories. They are usually makes a lot of sense, and it's a good way of addressing large cities. But in the case of small towns or rural areas, they might not be ring the right bell. So what we have done in our center is try to identify or try to develop some participatory spaces or opportunities in which local communities can also identify which are the indicators that make more sense for them. Of course, there's a risk in there that you may end up with a set of indicators that are not only more suitable, but also more comfortable or easy to achieve. But I think that as long as there's a democratic process in which most people are involved, you should come with a nice set of challenging indicators that you feel comfortable with. I think there's nothing more difficult or more difficult for a strategy like this one when you propose some indicators and the community thinks that they're not the right ones for you, or that they come from the capital city and we are not in that path. So I think there's a challenge there, and I think there's an opportunity also to involve the community and make it more participative on the actions that all these goals require. We should recognize that we have reached this social environmental crisis by following what is more convenient for each of us. So most likely, getting away from it will involve some making us a little bit uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And if you don't have the local support, that will probably never happen. So it's very relevant, I think, to have the right indicators that you could that the local community could bring, which makes sense and which are challenging. I think that's an interesting combination that would make this agenda more suitable and more effective.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Carlos. It makes it more comprehensive to understand the concept of involving the community in defining those KPIs. Sonia, you had a question. Would you like to repeat that? Somehow I lost it on the chat.
No problem. In a nutshell, there are a number of different indicator schemes or frameworks. One would be the what used to be the Cities Prosperities Index, and I think it's now called the Global Monitoring Network. Potentially, that's recommended by UN Habitat. There's another one that's the ISO standard for cities data, and in the chat I'd put the number. It's ISO 37120 city series on city data. And then of course there's myriad other ones, things like the Youthful Cities Index. There's one recommended in Canada about well-being. So the question broadly for all the researchers and experts is there a globally accepted single framework or an emerging one or two that are most important to jump from? Collingwood's at the beginning of putting one in place, and we want to make sure that we take a path that has been tried and tested and likely will work for a small city, large town. Thank you.
Anybody on the panel can answer on that? Yeah. Can unmute the panelists, Roseanne?
Yeah, I think that that there is a commonality with all of these that can be identified. There's a vital signs report that's issued across the country by community foundations that looks at different issue areas. But I think what Juan Carlos is teaching us is that whatever we decide to use should be informed so that the rest of the community is involved in helping to achieve the SDGs. And I think, Juan Carlos, you presented a really interesting couple of slides on yours and how it's very easy to see visually where the progress is being made and where the gaps are and where more focus is required.
Yeah. Anybody else about the? Thank you, Roslyn, for changing. Any other panelists on the point related to the standards that Sonia asked? Any other points which you would like to add on to what Roslyn pointed out?
I was just going. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just one point. This is Rosario. I just want to share that it is very great to have various kinds of assessments, from City Prosperity Index to Vulnerability Index and so on. But the thing is, we don't have really any problem with those existing, and attempts are made for doing that. But the reality is that it is really, as I pointed out, it's really difficult to obtain local data. So we have to do something about obtaining data from small towns, rural areas, and so on. And I think the government will have to intervene somewhat. Just like, when we collect the census data.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosario. While we speak on the data, I have a very interesting data point around it. While we have the community involved and the local people being collaborative in defining these SDGs implementation policies and the practices, there are also globally the GDPR and the Personal Data Protection Acts that are also critical in light of it, there is an interesting data point, how data becomes a valuable asset. In the year 2020, that is the last year where we had the pandemic, there were 3,950 data breaches, okay, which is also a critical. While we summarize and give the holistic view without dwelling into the depth of the individual, it is all the more critical that this valuable asset of data is protected, because these breaches are going to continue for long. Okay, so that's an important point which I thought I would add to it. In that context, the ISO 37120 and similar standards play a critical part in having something across the urban cities. That's an additional input from my side, what I thought I would add. Any other questions? Anything? Any of the other panelists have some questions on other presentations from the panel?
I was going to come in there, Venkat. To say the place standard, the tool that I presented or talked about, that's the way we use of engaging with local communities, because the spider diagram is completed, in consultation, or it's their perception of their place. So, but the themes are similar to the SDGs. So what you can do is have a line of sight to the SDGs and that can help frame the discussion as well. So I was working on secondment in Wester Hailes again recently, and that's what we did, was we looked at the SDGs, the Scottish Government's own national outcomes. It was a way of translating those goals into kind of a local relevant discussion, because they are relevant at a local level, climate resilience, flooding, and so on, move towards active travel. All these things play out at a local level. So you've got to have that discussion there. So the place standard's a good tool for, structuring the conversation around those issues, and bringing people in, in a way that there's a framework to have, that discussion.
Good.
Excuse me, Ian, can I make a request? I'm very much interested in this place standard assessment in Scotland. I wonder if you can share some documentation with the panel members or everyone who are interested from this World Summit. I think it's very, very good.
Yeah, I can share links to the tool. We're creating a new website as well. It's got links to it. It's already, the World Health Organization are very interested in it. So it has been translated into Danish, Dutch. We should have a panel session at the COP26, hopefully in a few weeks' time. But we certainly, I should have put the links on the presentation, but we can give you all the links on it and evidence of how it's been used.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Ian Gilzion, I had one additional thing on the Scotland places. I found a KPI that is around natural space. That is an interesting part. While we focus on multiple other sustainable levers, the creation of natural space is a rarity that we see across the urbanization. So I found that as a very critical and important thing, because we generally look at technology, we look at the housing, we look at the water bodies, conservation, preservation, and all. But creation of natural space is very rare when we look at the urbanization. So that was an interesting point. And related to that, I also wanted to understand if this Scotland places can be replicated as a best practice by other cities as well.
So the understanding Scotland's places, I think somebody mentioned that about using census data. So a lot of the information is drawn from the census, and then it's arranged geographically into each place. So it's a lot of work went into setting the resource up in 2015. It's been updated, but it's government Scottish Towns Partnership are probably the people to go to. Phil Prentice, again, I can send links on how that data is used. It's a very easily accessible tool. In terms of green space, I think that's again, it's something to do with the way policy is going and the way that we've been able to use data to map green networks and so on. There's one of our national projects in the National Planning Framework is Central Scotland Green Network. So that tries to link up green spaces across the Central Belt in Scotland and links up vacant and derelict land. There's a lot of ex-industrial sites that we're greening now, and people like Scottish Canals have been excellent at creating new opportunities for cycling, wildlife on the edges of places. So if anybody's seen the Kelpies, these big structures near Falkirk, that's part of a whole wildlife major kind of regeneration landscape. So
yeah. What is the effort needed to develop an index system for town or a region? Yeah, this is for you.
Sorry?
What is the effort required for developing such an index system?
Excuse me, I'm just sorry to interrupt. In 2 minutes, we need to return to the main session.
Yeah, that was the question. I will be wrapping it up here.
Ian, if I could, it was my question is Jeff Fletcher here. Just wonder if you could just speak briefly to, the group or the unit or just the level of effort that you have to have, horsepower, people to create an indicator system for a town or a region.
I think it was a big partnership. It was like different organisations, coming together to recognise the need for that and invest in it. So I mentioned the Scottish Towns Partnership. That's set up to support towns, provide data, provide advice. So some sort of agency that can really run with it. Also got the Carnegie Trust interested in, social mobility and things like that. And plus the government seeing the sense of that. So it does need investment, whether it's academic, but you probably need some sort of partnership working to pull it all together, an investment in that programme. And then people to look after the upkeep. So Scottish Towns Partnership are really good at, promoting the data, making it accessible and making it relevant.
Okay. Thank you everyone. As we come to the end of this session, it has been a very engaging and comprehensive session covering multiple aspects of best practices, the places, the digital intervention, and the happening across the globe in terms of the data assessment and urban data assessment and technology for sustainable urban economy and resources to achieve sustainable development, the SDG goals as such. It was a very interactive session. There were quite a good number of questions and a lot of takeaways and best practices. I would take the opportunity to thank Dr. Rosario Turvey, Jeffrey Fletcher, Professor Juan Carlos, Ian Gilzion, Roslyn Morrison, Volka Vorkanovo, and David Downey, who couldn't join because of some other issues. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the participants, for your time. We all could join back to the main room now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And all you have to do is leave the room and it'll take you automatically to the main one. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Venkat, for wonderful moderating. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
the establishment of a Town Leaders Global Network for SDGs. I want to give a special thank you for Venkat Ramsawamy and Mayor Saunderson for moderating the sessions. We will now have a 10-minute break, at which time when we return at 10:40, we will continue to have discussion and presentations for theme 3, regional and global connectivity, and theme 4, public participation and civic engagement. I do want to remind everyone that in the afternoon, we are going to have the resolution discussions and adoption. We will first have 4 breakout rooms for each room will be for theme 1, theme 2, theme 3, and theme 4. If the moderators and guests who would like to attend, please attend. The sessions will be, again, the same thing, 4 breakout rooms. People will decide where they want to go. And then we're all coming together again to review and draft the resolution for this year. So please stay with us. Thank you very much. And we'll be back at 10:40.